We're live. It's Friday and it's 5 o'clock, which is a lovely time on a Friday.
Knocking off time.
Nearly red. Yeah, everyone's beginning to knock off. Go to the pub if they can, because it's a rarity these days for some people, and or at least think about the fact that they're going to have something nice to eat in a minute. But in a minute, I'm going to be speaking to my friend here, Cathal. But first, this.
I need to get going, Mel. See you later.
How are you doing, sir? Thank you for joining.
You. Yep, little bit chilly, but not too bad otherwise.
Where are you coming from?
The Midlands of England.
The Midlands of England.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Well, I like that the middle of England. I mean, it's spent a fair bit of time there, mainly eating Balties, really.
Oh, right. Well, I'm a little bit west of Baltic country. It's more. Okay.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. My son's in Cheltenham at the moment. I mean, you'd almost call that the middle of England, but it's still maybe a little south.
Yeah.
Yeah. So listen, you've had a long and illustrious career in music, on what I would call the alternative side of a lot of things. Where did it start for you? Where were your earliest memories of music?
Well, in the part of Ireland that I come from, really, which is the Cork city and county on the south coast, there wasn't a great pop music culture for sort of kids who weren't in the counterculture, which at the age of 9 or 10, I mean, who is, but it wasn't like it could just happen across much pop music. So I suppose these kind of strange reflections of the outside world and of Ireland's traditions were really the kinds of things that brought me to musical consciousness initially. And then in my teens, I began aggressively seeking things. First of all, pirate radio, both from the English Channel and from the cities of Ireland, because the pirate radio became a big urban phenomenon in the late 70s. So,
I mean, the English Channel, we know Radio Luxembourg, etc.
Mm-hmm.
and kind of things that they played, which had a massive influence in terms of what then actually crept into commercial radio. It actually changed the BBC. It changed commercial radio, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it essentially gave rise to Radio 1 and gave rise to at least the initial version of commercial radio that Britain had. Ireland's history, of course, is more complicated as always, given the small population. I think that
yeah. Well, I was going to ask you. So, what were pirate radio stations in Ireland playing?
Mostly total chart fodder.
Really,
a lot of disco,
Yeah,
and not the good stuff. Not Patrick Cowley, not Arthur Russell, but kind of disco duck,
Yeah,
and ELO. But in the evenings, some of them kind of anything went, really,
Right.
Especially in the Dublin area, but we didn't really have access to that. In Cork, well, you would just know people who would show up and play Wire, Dome,
Yeah. Isn't that what happened in a lot of radio at that time? There was this wonderful thing that happened in radio, and to be honest, even still existed when I first started in radio, in the early 90s, which was that there were shows where if you got put on late at night, what they used to call the graveyard shift, you could pretty much get away with it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, things weren't being market tested and consolidated such that like all the stations shared the same graveyard shift program, you know, and therefore it's playlisted like everything else.
Yeah.
No, there was really nothing like that. So yeah, if someone had the fortitude to actually show up, they could do whatever they liked as long as they didn't expect to get famous or, you know, whatever. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was never. I think it was never about that. I mean, you know, I for myself, I did plenty of sort of 3 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the morning shifts. But the absolute beauty of it was just being able to pick whatever you damn well liked.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there was someone I knew in Cork who used to specialise in just playing Bob Dylan bootlegs all night. Yeah, and you know, it was on a station which for the rest of the day was just ELO, you know, disco dog.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, what sort of gems from those? I mean, I presumed you listened to some of those early morning things, and what sort of gems did you pick up from there? Then you mentioned things like Wire, etc. But was there anything particular to Ireland that you picked up from that?
Not so much from that. There wasn't really a kind of a Irish specialism to it, because but my generation, we all thought that anything Irish was automatically backward. You know, like when we were in our late teens, it was only later on that a bit of sanity began to assert itself. But
yeah,
to be honest, the national broadcaster was pretty good on Irish traditional and classical repertoire, not so much the contemporary stuff that was really hard to track down. But for traditional music, the one national station was great, and they would also, you know, if the Irish language programming was a bit of a free for all. So you could have an Irish language program that played Henry Coe, you know, on the national broadcaster when there was only one frequency band, you know, for the whole country. So, you know, Henry Coe's War, you know, for example, being played, followed by Lynyrd Skynyrd. But I mean, you didn't mind so much, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, my appreciation of certainly the kind of golden age of early 60s, the Irish version of the folk revival, which was in two strands, really. There was a neoclassical Sean O'Riordan rediscovery and bringing of traditional tunes into the concert hall. And on the other hand, you had the ballads, and that wasn't all rubbish by any stretch. You know, there was a lot of cash in going on, but you had great people like Christy Moore, who essentially came out of that, and the Dubliners, Luke Kelly. You know, I mean, it was amazing stuff. So you kind of learned to not be cool, really, or at least you didn't learn to be cool. You know, it was just not really in the vocabulary. You were hungry for whatever you could find, and there was a mail order place in Wales, put in Porthmadog, that I used to order cassettes from, and that was great. And for some strange reason, Cork City had great secondhand vinyl availability. You know, just anything from prog to Scott Walker to you just never knew what was going to fetch up there. You know,
when did being in a band and wanting to do that band thing suddenly become a reality for you? When did that start for you?
It really started when I met Sean O'Hagan in 1979, because up to that point it had just been this aspiration, like hovering out of reach. Oh, you had to be able to play properly. I mean, you know, or yes, it was the ability thing that seemed too out of reach. But a few things happened at once. One was that I met the people who became bands like Five Gun Under the Sea, None Attacks, Mean Features, Urban Blitz, And then I met Sean, and he had a lot of the same aspiration, but he could actually play.
It's so helpful, isn't it? It's so helpful.
And he had equipment, and he was highly motivated to start doing stuff.
Yeah. So, do you know that equipment thing is so underrated?
It is.
But it's so important as well. I mean, I can remember when we started I was 14 and my friend was 14. I mean, I had an aspiration to be involved with music, but just did not know how at all.
Yeah.
But meeting someone who had a practice area, who had amps, who had a drum kit sitting in the corner in their home, had some instruments. It was it's so vital. It's like, oh great, the toys have arrived.
Yeah. I mean, plus having people who are just like certain, giving it a lash, without too much regard to the niceties, is pretty inspiring, and the people I got to know who were doing that were not from privileged backgrounds. They weren't being given a license to do it by anybody, and they were doing great work, so that was inspirational. And it was essentially through those people that Sean and I met others, and went through a couple of iterations of things and ended up with Microdisney. And as a 5-piece, we started playing, and there was a venue. The other missing thing, of course, is having a venue that will actually put you on.
Yeah,
that actually puts you on your toes, and we had that at that time in Cork. It didn't outlast our beginnings by very long, because the local economy kind of capsized. But it was in a ballroom near the railway station.
Well, now that was the other thing I was going to say about that, is back in the day as well, when we talk about venues, it's not necessarily venues like people understand venue. If any young people, it's not venues like we understand venues now, in a way.
No.
It was a place where people were gathering. The quality of that venue is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, it could vary. I mean, in our case, it was quite a cavernous old school ballroom that had been very important in the show band era in Ireland. It was one of the top places in the country. But this was like 30 years down the line. Oh no, not that much, like 20 maybe down the line. And it was being run one night of the week. It was taken over by this couple, Elvira and Andy, who started off running it as a kind of an adjunct to the university. And it was probably, I saw my first proper gig there, which was Graham Parker on the Rumour.
Wow.
They were brilliant, It was at their peak at like 76. And so
that's always important as well, isn't it? The first, if very early on in your kind of musical journey, one of your, if the first band that you see, or the first live thing that you see is amazing, that propels you as well, doesn't it?
It does. Although, I mean, I wouldn't say that Graham and the Rumour were slick exactly, but they've been doing it a while, and I mean, it had real punch, but it was, musicianship of a pretty high caliber, frankly, which we did not have. Were we likely to have for a long
aspirational though.
Yeah. And then, like, in the period after punk, Elvira was booking people like The Only Ones would come, played a couple of times, Doll by Doll, John Cooper Clarke. It was immensely varied. Seeing U2 opening for XTC in 1978, that happened there. And it was the original XTC with Barry Andrews and that. So
right.
pre Dave Gregory. Yeah, there was certainly no shortage of kind of role models. But the one in particular that was like, this is incredible was the Virgin Prunes.
Really? Oh, right.
Yeah, the kind of the middle lineup with Halaka Binti on drums and a lot of weird stuff going on under the surface, and very, very theatrical. Yeah, so I mean, there was all that, but we wouldn't have amounted to a hill of beans really if Elvira hadn't got someone to come and review a multi-band night that we were part of. Bill Graham, a journalist from Dublin, from the Hot Press, and we got a good review, and that led to us being able to go and play in Dublin, and then playing in Dublin we met people who knew about more than just the basics of kind of doing stuff, you know.
Yeah, and those good reviews along the way are so important.
Absolutely.
I mean, we were talking about a minute ago. We were talking about those pirate radios and what transitions from pirate radios over into the BBC, etc. And there was no greater kind of exponent of that than Mr. Peel himself.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean that was big to us as well. You could only pick up BBC Radio 1 after dark because of the ionosphere factor. But yeah, I mean, you'd record Peel, you'd do all the same things that people did in the UK with it. Really, I mean, it was the way in.
Yeah, and Mr. Peel was very nice about yourself, sir.
In due course, he was. Yes, I mean that was another decisive one. I mean, when we had slimmed down to a 2-piece and it was harder Scrabble, still really to keep going. The fact that he began playing Helicopter of the Holy Ghost and Pink Skin Man, really that was what paved the way to everything we went to do. I mean, the fact that we could be sleeping on couches in London and have a session the week after we arrived. I mean, that can't be described really what a leg up that was. And the fact that Peel and Walters kept on giving us sessions during a couple of years. I mean, the fact that you could, from whatever scratching around you were doing in London, you were actually getting through to people up the country, you know, Manchester, Liverpool, even Glasgow, as far away as, you know.
I don't think some people realise just how much of a sort of dual life, in a way, some people lead in that process, and I think it was kind of even more particular back in the day than it is perhaps now, because I know a lot of young musicians now have, they are career minded as well, and they have a career and they get the career sorted out, and then the music runs parallel and they self-manage and all of that. But I mean, I remember a very good drummer friend who at weekends was doing really very well and was getting on radio and getting played and was starting to play some very big gigs. And from the outside, you'd think, God, this guy's doing he's made it,
Yeah.
And then we'd meet at the fish and chip shop, and he's like, can I catch 50p to get because he just didn't have 2 pennies to rub together.
Yeah.
I don't think people realise that, you hear someone on radio, people think, oh, they must be doing great.
Yeah. But I mean, part of the thing, it's a funny phenomenon, and I've molded it from most of my adult life, that duality.
Yep.
But I've come to the conclusion that part of people's appreciation of what you do is in some mysterious way wrapped up in that suspension of disbelief.
Disbelief, yeah.
And I don't know what the answer in terms of candor, is about all that. But it is a tough one, and it's tougher than ever now, because people have to put themselves forward through so many pathways, if you like, in order to have any glimmer of what was achievable then with one afternoon's recording in Maida Vale that, that went on at 10 or 11 at night.
Yeah.
Funny.
Maida Vale's a funny old place as well, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, where to begin? I mean, you'd be walking down a corridor, you peer through the window in a door, and there's a space as big as 2 basketball courts with a symphony orchestra set up across one side of it playing, and you couldn't hear anything. And then sometimes the recording engineer and tape op and the producer would want to go for like one drink, and that would be in the tennis club across the street.
Yeah.
Strange.
I'm reading Richard Thompson's book at the moment, and he describes going to Maida Vale for the first time. He said with Fairport Convention, and he said, well, we arrived there and we expected like there might be tunnels from here joining various parts of London, and he said it wasn't that far wrong.
They were more psychic than perhaps than architectural, but I mean, being around the corner from Abbey Road, was such an extraordinary thing. As we carried our equipment by hand from where we lived, which is about 2 miles away.
So, coming back to today, I mean, you've been busy. You've been very, very busy, as a lot of musicians have. Was that kind of forced on you at all by the pandemic, or was this planned that you were going to be doing this much output?
It was planned.
Okay.
From about 2018, but obviously the shape of it has been completely altered by the pandemic. In some ways for real, and actually in some ways for good. Certainly the association with Jackknife Lee, sort of becoming reacquainted with him, it probably would have happened, without the pandemic, but both of us having enough time to devote to the quite large body of work that we've done now, we probably wouldn't have been as prolific. If it wasn't for the pandemic.
So for people that don't know, so tell us about the 2 projects, if you like. So the Telephus project, how does that work out? Where do you come up with the ideas for that?
Well, I've been working on my Song of Co-Aklan album.
Yep.
And it was just kind of winding down, but in the course of it, I'd been doing some work with my old friend Luke Haynes. He played bass and synth and things on Song of Co-Aklan, and he just mentioned that a record he had recently made with Peter Buck had been remixed by Jackknife Lee, and I went, oh God, I know him, because we had met years ago. We were both kind of under the tutelage of, me and Sean and Garrett and a whole set of other people in Dublin had been heavily mentored by Dave Clifford, who ran a publication called Vox, not to be confused with the English music glossy that came much later.
Yeah,
but it was a fanzine, but it was with a kind of a high concept fanzine with a strong visual art bent, because that was sort of his background. But Dave had a number of axes to grind in the popular music era, especially the experimental post-punk pop music field, and he made a great impression on all of us, and was very kind and very very helpful. So I knew Garrett from back then, from a couple of events that had happened under the auspices of Dave. And Garrett, as I recall, played one of his first solo outings as a very young musician, opening for Microdisney on our final two-piece show in Dublin before we emigrated. We'd been in sporadic social contact through the years, but through that kind of Luke connection being made, he put us in touch, and we had a video chat, and Garrett said, well, why don't we do something? So it started from there, and he is, when it comes to creativity, he's a force of nature, really.
Off the scale.
Yeah. He's always tinkering with intent.
Yeah.
So we kind of created this way of working whereby he initiates something, a track, to usually quite, conceptually developed, if not entirely fleshed out musically, and then I'll do some work on it, which varies in extent. I mean, it's usually most of the lyrics, and sometimes, quite often, the vocal melody, and the vocal, and we bat it back and forth a bit until it's a thing. So,
and of course, there's quite a lot of electronic sound in that project, etc. as well.
It's, I mean, the backbone of it would be electronic, but there is always quite a lot of live playing. I mean, sometimes it's live drums, live guitar, but the backbone is analog synths, and I mean, distressed, quite often some distressed audio, basically.
Yeah. And tell me about your other project that you say that completely just before that, the Songs of Co-Aklan. I mean, it's so nice in a way to be in a position where you've got these different projects out, and they sound very, very different as well. I mean, that's I think always a nice place to be in for an artist.
It's liberating, because really one of my biggest regrets about being in bands, being in Microdisney and the Fatima Mansions, was not being sufficiently objective about the situations we found ourselves in, to know that, to allow myself to dream that was not the only way of doing music, and things don't have to end in order to unlock other ways of being creative. But when, I don't know, you only are what you've experienced, really, I suppose. And at least I have remained active long enough to experience a situation where there is this liberty that comes from being able to do things in more than one way at the same time. So I've got my solo stuff going on, and it's a completely different way of operating, and in fact having this other thing that I like to kind of ricochet against without condemning it, or without stopping it, is really terrific.
Yeah, I was gonna say, does it have that has an absolute positive impact on your own stuff as well?
It does, yeah, because when you have a kind of a shared creative agenda, there will be things inevitably that don't fit into it, and therefore are approaches that don't fit into it. So obviously, the week after you've rounded off a piece of that work, you're going to think, well, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do things that way now,
Yeah.
And you can move back and forth. I mean, there are only so many days in the week. So I mean, people do overstretch themselves with that way of going about it. I guess it's never happened to me, but
I think lots of people overstretch themselves in all walks of life at the moment. So we've got the album out. We've got some EPs out of the Telephus stuff. Is there a full album coming of that?
Yeah, the album is out next month, like February 11th. So
right, brilliant.
It's the first Telephus album, and we're nearly finished the second one. So that should be out, like, we hope later this year. But we're quite vinyl dependent, and I think the whole world knows what that means these days.
Well, there's a couple there's a couple of artists beginning with A that have used all of the vinyl up at the moment, so it's
so it is said. Yeah.
So it seems we're all waiting on we're all waiting on that to happen, get some more vinyl in. Are you going to take any of this live?
It remains to be seen. I mean, obviously the geography is a big challenge. I'm in the UK and Garrett is in Los Angeles.
Yep.
But he does travel back and forth quite a bit, and he's got his Irish links still extant. So I wouldn't rule it out, but we don't have a mechanism figured out for it at this stage.
Well, travel permitting.
Yeah, plus there's that. Yeah.
So it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
Likewise, Graham.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to hear this music, obviously they can listen to it on their favorite streaming platform. But for you, where would you like people to find your music?
Well, in their local independent record shop, or Bandcamp, if that suits better.
Yeah. I just wish there were more local independent record shops still.
Yeah, so do I.
That's the thing, because they were great meeting places as much as they were record shops. So do support your local record shop if you can still. And these will be out on vinyl though.
The album is on vinyl, and hopefully not too long after that we'll be releasing the Jah Wobble collaboration on Falun Gong Dancer from the album as vinyl.
Fantastic. Right.
We're in the process of releasing the Wobble versions digitally over the next couple of weeks. The first one came out today, basically.
Yeah, there's a man that's put his name to most things over the years.
He certainly has, yeah, and he's kept his signature. That's the amazing thing.
Yeah, no, tremendous. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Brilliant, Graham. Thank you.
Let's keep in touch, and I'll speak to you again at some point. But thank you very much for this today. Bye.
Okay, take care. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.